So when we're talking about young lads running on the grass in the sunshine, we think that's an indicator of financial value. We don't see these things as trade-offs, we see these things as very much win-win. But we talk about value in a much wider sense. So we talk about it in relation to the owners of the place, the people with a financial stake. We talk about it in terms of society more widely, and we talk about it in terms of the planet. So, in other terms, social value, environmental value, as well as financial value. And how we go about that is, and this is available on the web, freely available, is something called Big Blue Footprint. And it's very much in our DNA, it's a process, it's how we train people coming into the organisation. And its focus is, and you'll hear me say this probably more than once, on people, place and planet. And we think those three things go very closely together. But there's four kind of technical parts to it. The first is design. The second is environmental sustainability. The third is social progress. And the fourth is health, happiness and well-being. And what we've tried to do is, and it's an effort, is to keep up to date with the latest thinking in those four areas. So Footprint evolves continuously. And helping us do that, we've got an advisory board which is chaired by a guy called Jonathan Porritt, who used to be UK government's chair of their Sustainable Development Commission. Then we've got people from various different roles. We've got the Chief Exec of the UK Green Buildings Council. We've got one of New Economics Foundation's happiness gurus. We've got the LSE's Professor of Social Policy. And we've got the former President of the Royal Institute of British Architects. So the four bits of our approach, we've got someone we hope is an expert who can challenge us but can also help us with the latest thinking. So that's how we do it, but that's not how most places are made. And I suppose my fundamental problem with the debate today is that, on the whole, professionals don't make places. We might like to think they do. Most of us here are professionals. But actually, most places are housing. Housing is roughly 80% of the built environment. And most housing is built by volume house builders. They build about 70-75% of the housing, new housing. And most volume house builders are not professionals in the sense that I defined it at the beginning. They don't see themselves as having a wider duty to society. So I did hear a number of people in the groups observing that over the last few years the new places that we've got weren't of the highest order. And I would say that's partly because they're produced by developers, and partly, and this may sound pejorative, but it isn't meant to be, the people who are making those decisions are ignorant of much of what we've been talking about today. They haven't learned that. They haven't even experienced it in their careers. And a lot of what we're talking about, and I heard this phrase in the group as well, is, in the economic sense, externalities. So, in the economic sense, an externality is a cost or a benefit that is felt by someone outside of the person, in this sense, making the investment. So, from a developer's point of view, let's be crass about it. If he builds something, and it's normally a he, I did say the other day in an event, what we should do to solve this problem is simply put women in charge of regeneration. I think that would make a huge positive difference. But he won't bear the cost of an ugly development. And I heard this in the group as well, that at the end of the development, the developer's gone. He hasn't got a long-term stake in it. So those negative costs that developers are putting onto society and onto the planet, one of the ways we can think about this is how do we internalise those costs and benefits into his development appraisal, into his financial processing. And the other thing, and I'll come back to this probably, but developers don't necessarily appoint professionals. There's a lot of schemes out there that the only interface they'll have with professionals in the sense we've been talking about, people, members of professional bodies with a higher duty to society, is when they come up against the regulatory system and the planning system. So they don't recognise this duty. Now, that sounds very, very pessimistic, but I think there is quite a lot of pressure to change. So if I look forward, I see the pressures coming from a number of different areas. They come from employees, interestingly. That's probably, in our experience, the biggest pressure at the moment. The next generation coming through are expecting things from their employers that a traditional volume house builder historically has never offered. They're expecting them to have a strong sense of corporate social responsibility, to be thinking about the planet. We heard a bit of that earlier. So there's pressure from that end. There's actually pressure from investors as well. Does anyone know what the average length of time a share is owned on the London stock market? Anyone know? Guess? It's about 45 seconds. But even in those circumstances, investors, and this is my world, investors are becoming much, much more sensitised to the risks attached to what might be described as bad business practice. So they're demanding better business practice from developers. We're seeing it from customers, although I did hear what I thought was a great comment about the people who buy from the volume house builders, and the statistics are quite interesting. Only about two-thirds of people would not buy from any volume house builder, but the people who do buy from volume house builders buy from volume house builders because they're not being given much of a choice. But there is a pressure from customers. But increasingly, and I don't know whether you sense this, there's a pressure from voters via politicians. And whether you call that license to operate for these firms, or whether you see it in the regulatory response, through planning policy, through building regulations and so on, we can hear party leaders talking about ethical capitalism, talking about producers and predators. So we can see these pressures are coming. And I can see some relatively mainstream property developers, Barratt's probably a good example in house building, starting to change the way they go about making places in response to these pressures. So I have a degree of optimism, at least where Barratt's concerned. Don't start me on Persimmon. Okay, so something about regulation then. Regulation is very effective with house builders. We've seen that, I think, particularly in green buildings. Buildings, the advance, I live in a 15-year-old Bellway flat. The gales blow through the windows and the doors. The entire roof of the entire block failed after 15 years. The quality, certainly the quality of energy efficiency in most building today is much better, and that's simply because of building regulations. But the industry really fought those regulations and continue to fight and are winning in some areas like zero carbon definitions. But I don't think placemaking is a very good place to try and manage the delivery of better places through regulation, or at least not through that kind of regulation. Planning system is not very good at getting good design for a series of reasons. So I'd like to propose a different approach to regulation. So if we're looking into the future, we can see some of these positive pressures on developers. What can we do to help take them down that route? And I'm quite attracted to the ideas of natural selection. So you could have league tables where developers were ranked, and it'd be really interesting to decide exactly what the scoring system was, but were ranked in relation to the quality of places they were creating. And that might be on measures of social value and environmental value and so on. And then you might give the people at the top of the premiership some advantages. Better access to buying public land, easier rides through the planning system. You know, there are various things you could do, and behaviour would change very quickly, because one thing that industry is good at is imitating other people's success. And then I had a similar thought in relation to professionals, because I've been really kind of grappling with this during the course of this afternoon. And the thing, I'm a surveyor, and actually I think the RICS has the pendulum swung back in a bit of a better direction over the last few years. But these are organisations generally with royal charters, and it's the royal charter that sets out this greater duty above the duty to the client. But nobody enforces the royal charter. So how about we start enforcing the royal charter and start threatening these organisations with the removal of their royal charter? And that starts to threaten the entire edifice. And just see what the threat does. I suspect it would make some of these organisations think a lot more seriously about their duty to the wider society and the wider environment. And that stuff, which I hadn't seen before about the engineers, really filled me with hope. And then there's a couple of other things, again on the regulatory side. Something called the Social Value Act, which deliberately doesn't apply to placemaking and capital works, which seems bizarre to me. And UK government had a task force a few years ago on sustainable procurement, and they didn't look at this sector either. So there are things happening in other parts of the economy that we could just grab and bring into built environment, which I think could be quite powerful. And then finally, some stuff about process change. And this for me is really about where we need to learn from the best and the worst, and work out what they did that either went wrong or that they got right. So here's a scheme that was designed by a professional. You'll be glad to know it's just been knocked down, this one, but it's not very old. Designed by a professionally qualified architect who actually thought he was doing the right thing at the time. So we need to be very wary of professionals telling us what's good for us. And I was hugely enthused about all the talk about community leadership in this area. And here's another one. This was Salford Quays in Manchester, and this was designated when all the docks had gone and it was just brownfield land with lots of water around it. It was designated as an enterprise zone, which of course you know means limited to nil planning. And so we got this bizarre collection of really rubbish buildings with almost no sense of place, except for the fact that there happens to be some water in it. And I could go on and on with pictures of this. And if you think this is good architecture, by the way, you may be in the wrong lecture. And then a couple of examples from Birmingham and Leeds. So two very similar sites, brownfield sites next to canals, both owned by regional development agencies, some lovely historic buildings. In Birmingham, they knocked these wonderful buildings down. That's the first thing the public sector did when they bought them, knocked them all And they got a professional to produce a plan like this. And that was somebody's vision. In fact, it was such a vision that they used it in their marketing and entitled it Delivering a Vision. And actually, I think partly because it's so bad, and partly, but mainly probably because they knocked down all the nice buildings that were there before, absolutely nothing has happened on this site for 10 years. A very similar site in Leeds, they kept the buildings, they refurbished them, they filled them with young high-tech businesses. They're all completely full now, and they're now moving on to the next stage, which is a scheme, something like this. So, about something process, about how you go about making places from the public sector perspective. And then the inevitable Malmo Western Harbour side. Klaas Tam, who was the urban designer for the first phase of this, just absolutely brilliant guy. I won't spend too much time on it, but I show these slides mainly because it gives me an opportunity to show a picture of 10,000 naked Swedes. What's not to like, really? That's remarkably similar to Ian's slide. And is Ian still here? Because I was going to ask him whether he has an office competition as well, to see how often you can show the picture of naked Swedes. That's why I asked you. And the Eastern Islands in Amsterdam. Again, these are all very similar. These are sites with not much going for them actually, except for the water. But here, lots of different elements, lots of lessons to be learned, things like custom build. If I just go through what I think the lessons are very quickly, both from the bad and the good. So I think the lessons are you need a good client. First and foremost, you need a good client. If you've got a property developer that doesn't care about this stuff, you're not going to get a good place. Then you need a great urban designer, and to be honest, we haven't really been training them in Scotland or in the UK for quite a long time. We've started again, but it's going to take a long time for those people to come through. You need lots of different architects, so you need variety, one of the things that's lacking in that Birmingham picture. You need a mix of uses, and lots of uses that don't really show up in planning use class orders. And you need those to be cross-subsidised, so you can't have the most valuable use on every single plot. And that's a very complicated thing to achieve. You need community co-production. I've really heard that message strongly from the groups this afternoon. We're now doing most of our schemes with the community actually as the client, and very often as the developer actually taking risk. And we would say you need custom build. So this row of houses, each one was designed for the family that were going to live there and designed individually. I think you need long-term investment. So you need developers that don't run away at the end, and you need investors that will invest for longer than 45 seconds. And you need to be doing all of this as if people and planet matter. So these are kind of seismic changes, changes to the regulatory approach, changes to industry methods. But I do think from the examples that we can see around the world, they do have the potential to change placemaking in the way, even though we find it hard to define, the way we intuitively think is the right direction. So professionalism means owing a duty to society and to the planet. We need to find ways that the people who are actually in charge of making the places, which generally means the developers, have got that in their DNA as well. So I've come up, this is really cheesy, to finish 4 Ps. Professionalism for people, place and planet. Thank you.
Want to leave or you want to take some questions?
I can do some questions if you like. Everyone else wants to report back. I let them report back. it'll be much more interesting.
Eric has a quick
Can I
question.
ask
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
You made reference to Barrett. I think they produced a guide recently about better placemaking, which basically is derived from Building for Life. Barton Homes are also doing their social sustainability model. In Scotland, we're doing a place standard. What's your sense of, is this a neat marketing ploy to position yourself in the market to gain competitive advantage, or is this something deeper rooted in terms of some of the aspects you talk about, the social sustainability?
Yeah, it's both. The social sustainability stuff that Barclay are doing doesn't bear close scrutiny. It's not very good, but it's well-meaning, and it's great marketing for them. They rely incredibly heavily on the public sector. In Barrett's case, Mark Clare's come from outside the industry, so he's not a bricklayer or a, I was going to say constable, they're professionals technically. And he just sees it as the right way of doing business. And I'm sure he's right. He's head and shoulders the best house builder out there. At the moment, they're a bit out on their own, those two. I mean, they are absolutely the right examples, but they're a bit out on their own. And others haven't decided to follow wholeheartedly yet.
Taylor Whitby?
No, not
Do you,
there.
do you see some split between the role of large-scale house builders, volume house builders, and small, local, more
Absolutely.
making tech development?
Absolutely, yeah. So, for me, the kind of ideal model is, I guess it comes, I heard someone talk about having community planning and spatial planning together, and in England we have neighbourhood planning. If you've got the community leading the kind of planning process, and then moving down to the, on a neighbourhood-wide area, then moving down to the site level and creating development briefs, and then you have individuals, ideally from that community, custom building with small builders, then I think you'll end up, even if you're only doing small sites, you'll end up with something that the people, under my definition, will much prefer than if you've got a spec volume house builder building to a lowest common denominator and disappearing in the end.
And how does that fit with what you were saying about value? Because obviously the big house builders are value driven.
No, they're not. They're short-term profit driven. The individual custom builder is long-term value driven. It's in their interest. There's a great place to go. I should have shown some slides actually. There's a great place called Hobros-Cartier. It's a neighbourhood in Almere in Holland. I really recommend it. It's after Malmo, Western Harbour, it's the best place to go at the moment. 1,300 homes, entirely custom built. And the guy who's in charge of all that used to be the Dutch urban minister. And he has a phrase, he says, he makes a distinction between a custom builder and a volume house builder. And he says, you can trust the custom builder to make sure the shitter works. I'm not sure whether his English is not quite spot on, but and what he means by that is the person building their own house is doing absolutely everything they can to maximise its long-term value in every sense. You know, not just the house price, but in every sense. They want to be good neighbours, and they've got all those kind of things going on. Where the house builders disappeared. He's determined that I have to leave to get my train. Got one more. Okay, perfect. I can take the mic off.
Talking about planning, getting a visual view of the rest of I'm in no position to challenge that, but you have to be talking about England here, because if we're talking about Scotland, then I would encourage you to review, start adding student home group, start adding villa home, add maximum, start adding strengthening food. These are all companies who are, for better or worse, trying to use the place, trying to use design suites, for example, to deliver developments and give them a market edge. We're not driven into this because we suddenly get it and design principle, but we have to recognise that if we use this approach, you can grow a market share and you deliver a product which is a company that is not. So I don't say anything about all
Okay, I have a question from your organiser, which is that he said we would finish sharp at 5 o'clock. We would like the report back from the 4 groups. Would you still like your 2 minutes, or would you like a minute and a half?
Because we want us to finish by 5. We are happy to stay 5. No, but you want us to finish 5, 1 minute and a half? Okay.
Yeah.
Minute and a half each.
And if you have any of these and you're leaving, can you just add them?
By all means, please, there is evaluation sheet by the end. We really would like to have your feedback, please, and to hand it all these materials. By the way, I am aware some of you take a lot of notes. If you could give us your notes back, because we're going to write them in the report, and the report will send to you before the Christmas. So if anyone has got something to give us, by all means.
Probably back to it.
Okay. Right. Group 1, minute and a half. The key issue you identified against each of your questions.
All right, just the key issue.
Yes.
Right.
That's why it's only really.
Well, actually, I'll do 9, 10 seconds each.
Yeah.
The group is very sophisticated conversations. That was one thing about cooperative conversations as well. It's very good. What is happening now? I think there was some frustration around where are the examples. There's been a lot of pilot projects and a lot of initiatives. What do we do? Someone pointed out a patchy approach to consultation. So there's some type of differentials, what's going on. Some policy issues are fixed. Some reference was made to designing streets. Some aren't fixed. So those are 3 key things from there. What needs improving? How do you incorporate small scale? I think Chris covered that pretty well. Resources for community engagement. I think that reflected what developers are getting away with or not doing, or what the council can do or not do, depending on what resources it can get. And then what needs improving, the third point, was the placemaking, a lack of a tangible definition, which I've got some sympathy with. It gets rolled out under everything at the moment. What do you want to happen next? I think there was pretty much consensus in the group. I think I'll just jump to the last point really, is that it was delivering consistency of consensus of practice. There's a feeling that there's a lot of knowledge spread across 4 or 5 disciplines and lots of projects that can just be applied. So we don't need to do too much more in terms of pilot projects, but perhaps focusing in on what actually should be done. It's not about the big master plan, and it's learning from doing rather than just doing the big stuff that we saw around visioning and just architecture. I think in 90 seconds I've tried to capture 7 expert views. Is that a thumbs up from one person? 2.
Okay. Group 2. Who's group 2? You are. Sorry.
Let me take the lecture.
We had a good and ranging discussion, but here's some points from it. The first point, it was mainly a discussion we had around placemaking and its definition, and there are 2 dimensions which really you recognise. One, existing places, people do have a sense of attachment and a sense of place, whereas new places, particularly places that have yet to happen, effectively we're designing to reflect principles of sustainable development. So there's, as we move from new to existing, we have to develop a sense of place. What need? The next question was needs. Good starting point. We're currently in the position of not bad enough to refuse, which is the current default position of development managers. And that's no longer acceptable. But it wasn't just the fault of development managers. It's public attitude that's widely shared. Planning authorities, elected members, as well as officers, it's widely shared there. And developers, likewise, all prepared to accept mediocrity. So the issue was, how do we raise aspirations? And there, particularly professionals, a lot of emphasis to be laid on developing better communication skills and abilities, including the use of sketching up. Second need was to recognise that placemaking is not about designs offering a place-made solution. Placemaking is about evolution. It's an evolutionary process. And to create a sustainable community, we've got to talk about generating a generative capacity, creating local organisations, local capacity. Ideas were range from playgroups through to self-help groups. And the final set of questions relating to next. Private rented housing and self-building housing are recognised as essential if we're going to have new sustainable communities in the future. There just isn't enough money in our pockets to continue the pursuit of the owner-occupation dream. So private rented housing, self-built housing, absolutely essential new housing providers. And there's a need therefore to interest pension funds as long-term investors in supporting these sectors. And they'll produce in turn a community mix at the local level, the community level, which will reflect this, which will be productive of more sustainable communities, less reputational problems developing with those with singular mixes, singular household characteristics. So diversity providers leads to diversity of community. How's it going to happen? The public have to demand that investment flows into new provision. And that was our group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Group 3.
Okay, in relation to the first question, we also had this discussion about the terminology and concern about that, particularly around the sort of generic application of placemaking as a term which can be applied to a city scale or very small neighbourhood scale. So I think that was seen as a language, potentially a language barrier between communities and professionals. So I don't know whether we can find another term to describe what we're talking about, but that was kind of the first topic that came out. Second thing on question 1 is, I suppose, a kind of measured optimism in terms of creating sustainable places. I think it's not all doom and gloom. It's a work in progress. But I know we talked about this at the Apache. I think that was a general view that one of our group is from one area in Scotland and is actually going out and looking at other places in Scotland to see how it's done elsewhere and learning from that. So that all sounded encouraging. The second question, we talked about again, I think I would explore this, but a kind of just feeling that we need some genuine community empowerment, and that could come through what Chris was talking about, the kind of the need to create genuine kind of opportunities for co-housing, for co-production, and making that kind of really meaningful. So it's not just words that the Scottish Government or other public agencies are talking about. It actually turns into something meaningful. You can see the outcome. You can see people doing stuff on the back of that idea that you look at assets. So that all fits in with government policy of prevention agenda, asset-based approach. It has to be turned into real action on the ground. An aspect of that would be, again, to try and get this kind of split between spatial and community planning addressed, because there was a feeling that embeds silo thinking as a way to do things. the community planning looks at things in certain ways. People take actions, they look at their own kind of actions in relation to whatever they're doing, and it's not really about outcomes. And it's also at a high level. That happens at a high level, not at the grassroots community level. And then the final point was about matching the needs and wants of the community with leadership. So we need to find ways of creating a leadership that allows the community to get what it wants out of these potentially new processes. There's an aspect of local democracy with that, but again, I think the key idea would be about making the process work for the community within a context of leadership that allows that to see the benefit of the community having that ownership.
Okay, thank you.
And just
And
the
group
overlap
four?
section during the discussion and everything.
Okay, I'll just give you the, we voted for which one was most important
Yep.
future things. I'm not going to give you the general thing. For question 1, we talked about two sides of the one coin. The group identified that there were some really good, properly community-led projects where professions were seen as a supporting role and that were good examples of learning, but there were other projects where the engagement was happening too late and it felt more like a tick-the-box exercise. In terms of what needs improving, we need the processes to be accessible to everybody early. We need to draw in the community and don't put them off. This has to be a cultural norm. This is just the way we do things. It's not something that's been introduced by professionals. And we need to continue to involve the community throughout implementation and the constant change that happens within the communities and places. So it's a kind of full life cycle involvement rather than just at the beginning stage. And then in terms of what do we want to happen next, we talked about needing to raise the aspirations about what we in Scotland consider to be tolerable places. So all of us become more demanding as a society, and that involves communities knowing what else is possible and have some understanding of the negative externalities, and local authorities becoming more accessible to good ideas.
Okay. Okay. Right. The impossibility of summarising that in one go. So what I will say is, I know from talking about this, Alan, that we are going to produce a report off the back of this. And so when that report is available, we will circulate it to you. I think you agreed that there would be an opportunity for people to comment on that. Yeah? So what I will try to do is to turn my notes into something that is intelligible, at least to me, if not to you, and include it in the report. And if there are issues that you think needed to be captured, even as minority reports from your group that haven't been expressed in this space, please feel free to come back to us with them. We're 3 minutes over being a good host.
So just briefly, and I better actually finish. First of all, I really would like to thank all our partners, because one thing I didn't mention earlier, when we built the program this time round, we really about 10 people involved with the program. We spent about 6 weeks to build it over the summer. So that's one thing I'm very pleased to have such a partner. And also I would like to thank our sponsors this time round as well. They've been generous with us and they sponsor the event. More importantly, you would be pleased to know that we managed to get small fund with discussion with my colleagues in Geddes, Checker, Scottish Government, RTBI and others. We managed to get small fund about issue of well-being and where well-being fit within the charrette and the design-led approaches We have really advanced discussion. We're going to have 2 important symposiums similar to this one, either next March or April. So it's going to be March and April, and the last one will be towards December next year. We will keep you updated, but again, issue of well-being, placemaking, and where they fit in the charrette itself, I think that came heavily, and I am so pleased to have actually huge partner this time round. All they are keen to get involved, and we'll keep you updated. Once again, thanks very much for your time. There is drinks outside in the lift, and have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much for your time.